Hi, so welcome back to Foresight Paradigm. This is the latest paradigmatic discussions. I am speaking with Zara Kay. Hi, how are you?
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being on. So, Zara, tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you founded Faithless Hijabi, right?
Yeah,
Can you tell me about that organization?
yeah. So, Faithless Hijabi began about, or maybe exactly about 2 years ago. It was my curiosity to understand and relate to other women's stories, but then also to give them a platform and talk about it without the backlash of, well, one, their family, and two, now even more so, Western liberals who are all for Islamophobia. But a lot of it came from having 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 heard the other side of Islam. A lot of times, the people who represent Islam are the ones who are following it, not the ones who leave, not the ones who've had a different experience with it. And we've all
Right.
heard about honor crimes and we've heard about the extremes of honor crimes. But what we don't know about honor crimes is they start from years before somebody is killed or physically abused. And a lot of it starts from regressive societies. So a lot of Faithless Hijabi stories were around honor based abuse.
Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about how you got out of Islam, how you found your way out.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it like
So
a certain thing that triggered it? Like, do you start questioning or?
um I there were a few things that actually triggered that final stage of me leaving, and that was about over 3 years ago when I think the first people I told were my family over text. But it started like one of the biggest trigger to accepting that I wasn't a Muslim anymore was fighting in defense of homosexuality or gay marriage. And I was trying to Google the Quranic verses on what happens if people don't agree with you in religion. There surely is one that is peaceful. And I couldn't find anyone. It was more like, your religion comes first, and if they disagree with you in religion, wage a war against them. But if they ask for forgiveness, which I feel like I disagreed with them in religion, and I wasn't going to ask forgiveness to put humanity first, it said kill them. There were also contradictory verses that said, oh, well, if you kill one person, you're killing an entire, it's like you're killing an entire community or humanity.
Right.
And all of it was just confusing and contradictory. And I think for me, it all came down to how much did I actually know of the Quran? And I started researching more. But even then, I think I had to come into acceptance that despite being born and brought up a Muslim and praying, I hadn't really studied it. I was only told one narrative of it. And the moment I started studying it, it all kind of broke down the idea that I had about Islam.
Right. Yeah, I recognize that so much for me also. Like I had never studied Christianity or, religion, period. Um, and definitely people have asked me, is it one thing, that made you say, finally, I'm out? And really it wasn't. It was like thing after thing after thing after thing. And, studying science and history and your religion and other religions and um, realizing that the God hypothesis is, full of holes and it doesn't really survive scrutiny. So, yeah, I
Yeah, I
imagine it's pretty
mean,
similar for a lot of people. Yeah,
yeah, I think there are people who had one turning point,
yeah,
and then there are people who've had a long journey. So especially when you're a child, it's really hard to question things
oh yeah,
would that would result in you being punished or going to hell as a
sure.
punishment.
And if the people that
And
you
I think it,
trust, your parents, they're telling you, good things like, don't walk in the street, hold my hand, but they're also telling you, kind of crazy stuff. You take it the same way as a kid, no doubt. So, uh, Zara, are you with me? You kind of froze up a little bit.
okay,
Okay,
looks like
you
I'm
back?
back. think my
Okay.
connection dropped out for a bit.
All right.
Yeah, no, it happens. Yeah, it's it's also like a safeguarding issue as well when we think about it, but we've never challenged religious indoctrination or the rights that parents have over the kids with religion because it has been a norm for such a long time. Like not women not having votes was fought by challenging it, but we're still um, we're still not there yet with questioning how much power that parents should have over religious indoctrination or child mutilation, be it female or male. And that still remains a question that people are still scared to have a stance on, even though it's clearly wrong, where a parent shouldn't take that call to, I guess, cut off part of their skin off their child. But because religion is a question that comes off the back of it, a lot of people are scared to challenge it. And I feel like hopefully we're getting closer, but it's still very slow.
Yeah. And speaking of that, that's kind of going to be kind of our main topic is discussing kind of religion in the modern world. And you've lived several different places. I believe you said you're from Australia, right?
Yeah.
You're in the UK now. You've also lived in Malaysia and Tanzania, right?
Yeah.
So you've been around a little bit. And I've lived in Central America, the US, and Japan a little bit. So uh,
Wow.
it's very interesting to kind of look at how religion is in the modern world in different societies, and kind of why that is. But one thing is definitely clear, though, religion has diminished far more so than it ever has, in the history of the world. I mean,
Yeah.
like where you're at, like tell me a little bit about how it is in the UK living there, because I mean,
So,
I've seen studies showing that it's, the majority of the people don't go to church, and it's maybe half atheist. So, how is it living there now?
so I am at present in Tanzania, and I go back to
Okay,
the UK in a month. I am on holiday visiting
okay,
family, which is, I mean, okay, well, I was born and raised in Tanzania, and I got my citizenship for Australia due to naturalization. I spent about a decade there, and it was because I did an engineering degree.
okay,
So growing up in Tanzania, it is meant to be a secular country established by mostly Christianity, and there are still some laws that have, I guess, that kind of align more with religious or Abrahamic religions in terms of like homosexuality being a crime,
right.
freedom of speech is not guaranteed, and a lot of other regressive values that we have. But it wasn't as radical. I think UK is the most radical place I've been in,
Radical in
where
terms
I
of non-belief.
know radical in terms of the number of extremists or the ability,
Oh,
like
Muslim
despite,
extremists.
yeah,
Okay.
I think I fear more living in the UK than I have in Tanzania, being
Wow,
that yeah, it's crazy.
that's
There are
crazy.
areas in the
Yeah.
UK I wouldn't go. I know people in Tanzania know me, but I don't know of anybody that has been prosecuted for, I guess, being an atheist. Um, and Australia is still not that bad as compared to the UK. I feel like I feel like the Western world, when people have moved from the Eastern world or rather conservative societies to the Western world that isn't conservative and progressive, they tend to create a small circle where anything that they see as a threat against their conservative values will be shunned out or kept out, and the community keeps growing bigger and bigger, but even more close knit.
Hmm.
And and I think there will be areas, and I've seen that in the UK and some places in Australia, where those areas, while I embrace multiculturalism, where those areas no more look like part of UK. They have Arabic text, which is completely fine. They have Arabic shops, and I love Middle Eastern food and restaurants. But I think one of the most disturbing parts was that the attitude around that area is also quite different. So wearing the same clothes that I would wear in London City would be very differently, I guess, stared at or approached with in those areas.
Right.
And I guess those mosques around there and the community part of, the community part in those areas is quite apparent because you'd go out, it'd be like a small town where people know who you are. Thankfully, I have
Right.
not been raised in that area in the UK. So I haven't had as much experience as being a child of a family in the UK, but definitely it is something that I have noticed in the UK, in Australia, where refugees come in or people who have immigrated there for education or work and have managed to create their own little circle of support, but also their own little circle of ignorance and kind of staying away from the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. Why do you think um there is a difference between like the Muslims that come to the US and they can kind of integrate, and in Europe and other places it seems like there's kind of a segregation, and the Muslim wants to remain isolated and not, acclimate to the even the laws, the secular laws that are there to protect everybody and provide, fairness for everybody. Why do you think that is?
So from my analysis and understanding, I feel that Christianity was probably there 1,000 years ago, but we've also civilized quite a bit, and a lot of parts of the world that are in the West have been quite progressive with many progressive policies. But
Right.
I think, especially for Muslims who have moved there, are, and I say are, I mean, I was raised to believe that you're not living for this life. You're living for the next life, and you're living for heaven and hell, and
Well,
this is what
Christianity
heaven's.
too.
Yeah, but I think it's more enforced in Islam now and widely than
Yeah.
I guess Catholicism as much as it would be on Orthodox Christianity or maybe even smaller cults or Jehovah's Witnesses. So I think because Islam is major relation like religion, I think widely the same sentiments happen where it's always Islam first. Islam is your identity, Islam is everything, and you're centered around it. And not many, if there aren't as many progressive or moderate Muslims as compared to there are I guess conservative Muslims and then
Right.
extremists. While conservative Muslims are not extremists, they're still quite protective about their idea and keeping that tradition on. I see moderate Muslims as being a little loose on some of them, but for the large part, I think because we believe in the afterlife, everything that we've seen as a threat, we would isolate ourselves from. So if it's music, we're like, okay, no, 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 this is music. If it's talking to men, for instance, because it specifically says that yourself up because of this reasons, and you shouldn't have any interaction with men in a friendly way unless it's work to work related. And for the longest time, even my parents believe that a man and a woman can never be friends. And they're like, oh,
Wow.
one person must catch feelings. And I experience life very differently. So when I moved to the Western world, I was like, wow, this is amazing. You can do everything you want without feeling that need to justify yourself or like somebody suffocating you. And I think
How
that's
old were
when.
you when you?
So I left Tanzania when I was 16 and I moved to Malaysia, which was quite close to the Western world, which
Pretty
was,
late. True.
yeah, and I lived in an area where it was mostly international students. So
Okay.
it wasn't very different had it not been for some of the Malaysian Islamic culture, but it wasn't very different from living anywhere else in the West.
Right.
Um, so I think that was the first time that I saw a woman going to a prayer room without a hijab on, putting on a hijab in the prayer room, praying, and then leaving again without a hijab. And I'm like, so you are a practicing Muslim who prays and does not cover your hair. Like, you have,
Uh,
like, I was like, what is this? I didn't
How long did
even
it
know.
take you, like approximately, to become an atheist from that
Um,
point?
I stopped praying when I was 14.
Okay. It's kind
Yeah,
of
I
pretty
stopped.
quick that you just kind of abandon it all.
I It came from laziness, which I see now in my younger sisters that it's starting as well, laziness.
Right,
And it came from not questioning. But I stopped praying when I was 14, and I said I have a different relationship with God. But I'd never
right,
blamed or prayed to God for things I wanted after that age. It was when I was younger and I realized no matter how much I pray, it all depends on me. And
right,
that's when I started slowly dissenting, whether it was with prayers or whether it was with slowly not going to the mosque or wearing what I wanted to. So at age 18 was when I slowly started removing my hijab. And once that happened, um, I was ridiculed and slut shamed by a lot of people who were, I wouldn't say former friends, who were still my friends who were very Muslimish, and a lot of my community. And I think my parents too. My mom's a little soft spoken, but my dad was like, "Why do you have to?" And
right.
then I think we came to an agreement that I'd wear it when I'm in Tanzania and I wouldn't wear it in Australia. So
Did the study of like science play a part, or history,
um,
things like that?
I don't think it was science as much as it was logic.
Okay.
So
Well,
being this
science entails logic, so
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, I was kind of referring to like the biological part of it. So
Right,
the geographical part was not as much of a factor as much as it was, well, how is God, like, why do I need to pray to God if he knows everything and he knows that I don't want to pray and that, he's merciful and he's meant to protect me because, he loves me because that's what I've been told. So
right,
why do I need to pray? And it went in circles. And then I think I never really went in depth into a scientific theory of explaining our existence or how the world came about because I didn't care too much about it as much as I cared about, well, one, social justice, and two, having the freedom to be who you want to be.
right.
And I think the only part where science played was when I relentlessly defended homosexuality. And I was like, I don't even know, like, I know what it is, but I don't even know if the argument I'm making is convincing enough. Like, all I know is that they shouldn't live in fear and being hated. But,
Right,
like, what about homosexuality is acceptable, or what about homosexuality isn't acceptable by religious communities? So that's
yeah,
when I started studying more about other species. And then you know, when I was confronted with questions like, what do you think started the earth? What do you think started the universe? What do you think started human life? Or questions like, who made you? And I'm like, well, my parents had sex. And they're like, no, but who made you? And I'm like, but that's how it works. So being confronted with challenges and questions that I couldn't answer were probably what led into me having more of an understanding of my position, even though I'd already made the choice to not be in a religion.
right. Yeah, the the homosexuality angle, I've seen a lot of people that be a key thing for them, what kind of led them or started leading them out, of religion. Even in the US, churches are like emptying out. Like their numbers are declining kind of exponentially. You might not know it from like watching some like Donald Trump and some of his debates and things like that, but I mean the statistics show that it is even here in the US, it's changing a lot. And I've heard a lot of people talk about the homosexual aspect of it, definitely. What do you think about people like what's her name, Linda Sarasor, I think is her name, who kind of they're part of the feminist movement, but they kind of wear hijabs and they're like, this is our feminist thing, even though the hijab is forced on women historically and largely now. It's a thing that kind of in Islam is used kind of to denigrate women. But what do you think about that?
With Linda Sassou, I mean, I have, I guess, The first time I encountered her, I was a non-hijab wearing Muslim who heard one of her debates, and I actually clapped, and I'm like, oh my God, she's feisty and she's making a point, and yes, she's fighting for Muslim women that wear a hijab, and she's the one wearing a hijab and being a representation. So I wouldn't say I admired her, but I thought it was great to have that representation or somebody actually talking about it because in my head I was fed by a lot of people, including the media, that people just hate Muslims. Not that I'd ever encountered any hate living in the West for when I did
Yeah.
wear the hijab for my color. Well, I think I only had one or two racial attacks, but
Hmm.
um, nothing to do with me being a Muslim. So I'd never experienced that sort of um, narrative that people were fighting against. But it was already ingrained in my brain that, people don't like hijab wearers.
Right.
So when she fought against it, I was like, oh my God, look at her, she's fighting. And it only came to a realization that um, I convinced myself that Muslim women did choose to wear the hijab because I was 8 and I chose to wear the hijab. So that was great. Like, I chose to wear a hijab.
Right.
Um, but then as I moved forward, what I had convinced myself was basically a lie because it came down to what is meant to be a choice and what
Hmm.
isn't. And when I had made that conclusion that, hey, this is not that choice, and obviously that conclusion was kind of trying to be more informed about my decision. So it changed a few times and it still is. But for a child, because I was told that any strand of my hair being shown, I am going to be hung by it when I go to hell. That's scary. That's not a choice. When you scare people like that, that is not a choice. So when I see people like
Right.
Linda Sasso talking about feminism and vouching for the hijab, I don't think you're basically giving anybody a choice. You are telling them that, this is what God has ordained for you and this is what you should do. And you're
Right.
victim blaming them for not wearing the hijab. So I can appreciate and accept Muslim feminists appreciate a lot more than Linda Sasso. There are other Muslim feminists who are hijab wearing that have their own fight, which for the longest time I used to deny by saying they're not feminists. But I
Hmm.
realized that there is no singular definition of feminism and that different women do vouch and fight for different fights. So I know Muslim women who wear a hijab and fight against FGM. And I think they're doing tremendous work to help eliminate it. I think what I don't appreciate is women telling other women they're less of it because of it, or
Right.
that they're less of being a woman or a human or a respectable woman because you don't wear the hijab, or that you wear the hijab. I think for the most part, when you're hijab wearing, it's really hard to come to a position where you're like, hang on, like, is this what I want? Or is this something that actually saves me? Or is it something that I've been told that saves me? So even in Tanzania, where I wore a hijab, I was catcalled. In the UK, you're not going to get catcalled if you wear a hijab on some streets where there are non-Muslims because they know that it will result in Islamophobia or anti-Muslim bigotry, but you can still get catcalled by other Muslim men. So
Right.
it really did not protect me from anything, but it was a very difficult realization to come to then actually condemn the hijab and make a distinction between hijabi women and the hijab.
Right. What do you think about people that point out the oppressive nature of Islam, and how it oppresses women? And people call them racist when they're pointing out, this is not about race at all. This is about an ideology that, some white dude can convert to and have, and that this is that is counter to, you know, a global community, a progressive community, going to the future with everybody, being equal and what do you say about that? The people that call that racist, people that call out those ideals that are counter to progressive ideals, and call it racist. Like Sam
Yeah,
Harris, maybe people call Sam Harris racist, for example, and it comes to mind the most easiest. So,
I think there is a lot of identity politics that comes into play where Sam can't talk about it, but I can talk about it because I have lived experience, or that because I'm a
right.
woman of color, I can talk about it, but Sam can't talk about it because he's never been in my shoes, which is crazy. I think if we're both making the same point, it should be taken at the same level of, I guess, at the same level of not granularity, but kind of establishment or something. Um,
Right.
but in terms of people talking against Islam or ideas that Muslims have as racist is one way to basically shut criticism. And I think the best way that people tend to do it is by giving other people names that are derogatory in nature so that other people are forced into silence. They're cornered into silence and not speak of it. And also, a lot of times, and I've heard this from Muslims as well, they're like, hey, you're being racist. And I'm like, we're the same race. I can't be racist when
Yeah,
I'm
right.
talking about Islam. Islam is not a race,
Right,
or
right, right.
Muslims are not a race. But somebody made a point that I completely disagree on. I forgot her name. It was Mariam someone. And she made a point saying that when you think of Muslims, you see them as brown people because that's the majority of Muslims, even though they're not holistically that, but they do represent a race of some sort. So a lot of the attacks that you get that are against Muslims are actually against that race, which is completely untrue. And I think she was unable to identify what was racism and what was criticism of an idea or anti-Muslim bigotry, which
Right.
was all bundled up into one. However, not exactly making an honest point because I think because everybody is so scared to talk about religion and criticism of religion, they conflate it with race so that they can shut speech by calling somebody racist
Yeah.
or, Islamophobic now. I mean, Islamophobic is still a relatively new term.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think that you have to be like a part of a group to fight for the rights of that group and recognize why it's important. Because if the rights of one group are curtailed, hey, yours could be next for one. Plus, you just have empathy and you want to live in a world that, it's not full of bigotry, right? But
yeah, no,
by the same token,
absolutely.
I think you can comment on a situation of another group without being in that group. You can respect that you don't know the experience, firsthand, but you can still use your brain and you listen to them and you can, you know, you can talk about it, without having to be, like constantly worried, stepping on eggshells, to try to help the situation without somebody constantly trying to shut you down, saying you can't even speak, you can't say anything. You know, I don't think that's helpful. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I feel like if we limit criticism only from those people who have been from that oppressive group, then we shouldn't talk about any other ideas that affect human rights. Why should men ever have fought about women's rights? They did and they do. And some women are against women's rights, and that is factual. But why should we? I think it all comes down to why do we care about any ideas that don't affect us directly to be able to
Right.
speak about it? And my answer would be basically it is, I think it's that fight to make the world a better place. That I wake up every day to read horrible news like the French beheading, and it doesn't help me, it doesn't help anyone, and I could be that person next. And because we're not challenging it, because we're not fighting it, because it doesn't go to a global scale, we're not bringing as much awareness. A lot of people
Yeah.
still now don't know ex-Muslims exist. They still don't know that people can be born in Islam and leave. And the
Right.
first question I get um, when I ask about when I tell people I'm an ex-Muslim is, oh, how did your parents take it? Like it already has a negative connotation to it that, families might not take it well, which I think is very different when you tell people that, oh, I was born a Christian, I'm an atheist now, and I think they're different. Well, one, they're different reactions to that, but two, it's also that people haven't implanted it in their brain that, Christianity's, you know, that Christianity at a large scale does awful things to its former tenets.
Right. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the French Enlightenment. We get a lot of really great philosophies from that time, egalitarian philosophies and atheist philosophies from that time. And it's sad to see, some of the stuff going on there, definitely. But it's also encouraging to see all these people come together. And, Macron had a speech talking about, I believe at the end of it, he was referencing the Enlightenment, like something like "Here, the Enlightenment will never die," things like that. So, and people coming together, showing, what's the from the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity. Uh, yeah. Um, do you think because okay, for example, when I moved to Central America, you wouldn't think you would find any atheists, right? But there's a lot of atheists there, surprisingly. Like there's like atheists of Colombia, Honduras, big groups,
That's
and they have
awesome.
groups on Facebook that have thousands of members. And when I went to the universities down there, there were a lot of atheists. And there was a point where, like, when I was down there, I was starving, like, for books, because I love books and I have a huge library now. And I was trying, I didn't have my books. And I found books on, like, Nietzsche and Bertrand Russell down there, in Spanish in the universities. And that was cool. So, you never know, all over the place where you wouldn't suspect there are a lot of non-believers. Do you think that there's something similar in Islamic countries at all, or do you think it's so oppressive that they can't even exist?
I think there are more atheists than we know out there in Muslim majority countries,
Right.
but I think one of the most shocking discovery for me was to find atheists in Tanzania because that word atheist just doesn't exist. There's no
Oh,
such word as atheists. So it's that time where we invent a Swahili word for it. So I've only met a handful. I only know a handful. Um, but to see Africa, especially Tanzania, grow as a nation in all other areas, but not the Enlightenment areas, is quite disappointing. But it is also refreshing to see that, that 0.01% of the population are free thinkers. But definitely have seen, I think, I think going to Iran because I was visiting there because I went to the religious city. Everybody there around it was religious, but then you see the other women who were dressed quite modern, and you can tell they really don't like the hijab. Like there are women who wore it, and there were women who didn't.
right.
And thinking about just, my mom being raised in Kenya, how she never wore the hijab until she was 23, but I had to wear it when I was 8. Something really changed between that time where I was told to wear it as a child and she wasn't. And then kind of reflecting it back to what was Iran like before the revolution, and apparently pretty modern.
Yeah, you see
And
those
now,
pictures, those memes, right? Yeah,
yeah, exactly, pretty modern. And now it's not like that, even though it's building up to be, even though we have freedom fighters who are putting their lives at risk and in jail right now just for a movement that matters. And I'm sure Saudi Arabia and other places would be the same. But it is one of those things that atheists do exist there, and maybe they talk within themselves, but nothing online as much um, as compared to it would in the Western world. Mostly because I don't think you have universal human rights to protect you for the freedom of religion or from religion there.
yeah. Do you find yourself kind of like forced to align with like the right wing politicians regarding refugees in Europe? Do you kind of fear refugees coming in and kind of transforming the secular foundations of those societies where in countries where the majority of people are atheists, like in Scandinavia, etc. Do you find yourself kind of being forced to take a similar position, or how do you
No,
view
I
that?
think I think I've always been, I would like to say, a balanced or a central leftist. Or more of a liberal. And I don't think refugees are a problem. I think the problem is Western countries don't know how to have assimilation programs because I think thinking of it as like, obviously both ends, where one, a country accepting people with different values, but also two, people who need to go to a safe place, and those values stem from indoctrination or things that they've come a long way from. So if you've always taught a child that um, theft is wrong all their lives, and then you expect them to come to a country where you're like, um, maybe theft isn't that wrong. But I know I gave like a reverse example, but
Yeah.
I was trying to say like you've always been taught to respect a woman who is covered, and then you go to a country where women aren't that covered, and you're like, okay, well, I know I'm not meant to harass them, but is she inviting me? Like there are men who are legit confused. There are rapists. I was reading an interview of a girl who went to interview rapists in jail, and he was like, I didn't know I was raping her. I didn't know it was forced. She was my wife, or she was wearing short clothes, and in my culture, that is inviting. And I think that's where we need to make those changes, and that's where we need to start implementing some measures, be it, I guess, regulated, like immigration rules
Right.
or refugee camps where we actually, I wouldn't say concentrate about concentration camps or re-education, where we talk about these are our values and understand from their perspective on how hard it is to unlearn these things. But I'm all for people need a home, and we need to provide that home because I think as ethical, moral human beings, we should be going to extremes or lengths that give other people a safety net or give other people a safety shelter.
Right.
Because if it's not us and if it's not the Western country, where else will they go? Because the Muslim countries or Middle East definitely not provide any refugees as much as the
So,
West.
so you think the answer is better assimilation programs in the West? Do you think that that would really curtail all of the people who just don't want to assimilate and because of their religion, like you mentioned, that's first and foremost for them, right? More than higher than the government, higher than any secular ideals, about fairness and all that. You think it would curtail that enough?
Um, it's such a difficult question to answer. It's a yes and no question.
Okay.
If you look at somebody like me who went to the West, even though brought up like that, I
Yeah.
managed to do it. I managed to change. And then if you look at
Yeah.
people who have also been born and lived there, haven't. So I don't think there's one way or the other because I'm pretty sure I think some people react to it differently and there won't be one methodology that will work on others. I
Hmm.
mean, I come from a family where I'd never been to a restaurant where they served alcohol, even if we did drink alcohol. Like you had to go to a restaurant where there were Muslim cooks, otherwise you can't eat there. So even when we did travel, we had to be careful and ask around and go to halal places. And I come out and I am like, okay, I'm going to hug whoever I want to hug. I'm going to eat everything I want to eat, and I'm going to drink what I want to drink. Obviously, respecting that I can't do this when you're around, like with my family, when my family's around, so finding that boundary as well. But again, like my family are one of the very few that have accepted their apostate child.
Hmm.
So it's still,
So you get
it
along
is,
pretty well with your family.
yeah, I
They kind
mean,
of accept your.
I'm currently at my brother's place and we get along really well. Like all of us do, more so now than we did even when I was a Muslim. I think one,
Oh.
we've all matured, two, we've evolved to more acceptance and more compassion. But it was a long journey. It wasn't an easy one. But then at the same time, do I see my parents integrating in the Western society? Yes, in some ways, no, in other ways. Like, no, they wouldn't drink alcohol. Yes, they would not hurt somebody for being angry about what they say. Or, yes, they would make friends with a lot of people, but no, um, maybe they wouldn't go out with them to drink alcohol or to sit while they're drinking alcohol. So there are some things that I feel like could be um, very different for different people.
Right.
And I think I think now I'm beginning to, as we speak as well, I'm beginning to realize that a lot of Muslim reformists that, or a lot of Muslim modern moderate or modern Muslims need to take it upon, not upon themselves, but take it upon themselves to, I guess, preach a more tolerant version of it. I think they too play a big
Right.
part into assimilation programs because there's religious context that we might not know enough about, um,
Right. Yeah.
that we don't understand about, um, how we can work with refugees. And all of this could be speculation. I could be very wrong about it, but I think I would like to see it from two different sides because I don't think it's as polarized as a yes or no answer.
Okay. Well, Zara, last question. Are
Mhm.
you hopeful for the future in
If
terms
you
of
had
peace, in terms of, progressive values, secularism, things of that nature?
if you would have asked me that about a year ago, I would say no. I was like, nope. I see ex-Muslims leaving. I see this happening. I see this happening, but extremists are also increasing. But with all the attacks that have been happening, even though some people have been starting to boycott France, there are other people who are realizing now that, hey, what the hell are these Muslims doing? The other Muslims, the not so real Muslims. And
Right.
how is that impacting us? And how is that impacting our future? And how is that impacting what I've always known about Islam? And
Right.
that if they are wrong and we are right, we obviously have to be better than them and not kill people. And not that is the standard that we set for ourselves. But I think it's a start to recognizing that, hey, clearly this person was wrong.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's easy to be kind of pessimistic when you watch the news, right? Because obviously they don't talk about everything going right, which a lot of things have to be going right for civilization to keep, moving forward. Um, but there are a lot of points where you can be optimistic. A lot of statistics. If I'm sure you're familiar with Steven Pinker, his work, that it's very encouraging. A lot of the data shows that we have a lot of, you know, cause for optimism. But yeah. Well, Zara, thank
I'm
you.
actually,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm actually a massive fan of Steven Pinker because I heard his TED Talk on effective altruism. And now that I'm in Tanzania for my birthday, I'm actually raising funds to then donate to schools here that
That's
support
awesome.
children with
Yeah.
disability.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it made me realize that, there's so much improvement that Tanzania needs, and funding is one of them, and also expertise and that empathy that we need to show, to other
Right.
people who are quite disadvantaged than we have, like, than people in the West who have accessibility to many resources provided by the government.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And Steven Pinker, he's definitely one of my favorite writers. I mean, I was fortunate enough to meet him years ago, and yeah, his work is really inspirational. Really. I mean, it's yeah. Well, again, thank you, Zara, so much for
No
joining me today.
worries.
You're also a contributor to Atheist Alliance International. You're a council advisor
Yeah,
on
so I'm
on
on
the
the
board.
board.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I'm on the board for the advisory council,
right.
which was very, very new, but exciting news coming ahead for a lot of people
Yeah,
affiliated or interested in the organization.
yeah. They do a lot of good work, and I blog for them so uh, pretty regularly. So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, yeah. My latest one was on suffering, basically. Because I've had debates with theists to try to tell me when I say the universe is indifferent, like objectively, there's no God protecting anybody, and everything backs that up. It's just an objective fact. There's nobody being protected, whether they're due to religion or age or innocence.
Yeah,
Everybody is subject to the laws of physics, basically. So
yeah,
yeah.
great. Well,
All right.
I'll be I'll be sure to read it, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah.
Bye.